For those of you that have been following along with my rehab, you know that my last update ended with me throwing again for the first time, and if you haven't been following along, you also know that now. As exciting as the first day of throwing post-surgery is, it's also the start of a very boring month. Several boring months, even. The first month of a Tommy John Return to Throwing program is a month of throwing 60 feet in gradually increasing volume. So after the initial excitement wears off, it goes right back to the monotony that I think really characterizes rehab from an arm injury, especially one with a recovery time as long as the rehab from Tommy John surgery. Throwing again is a huge step, for sure. But in the context of the whole process, I just spent 4 months getting ready to throw, and now I'll spend another 4 months before I can even throw off the mound, let alone throw to hitters or in a game. And so the trend continues that with every step forward, we realize just how long the journey is, and it can definitely get a little disheartening. Lobbing a ball 60 feet for the first time is exciting, but meticulously tracking that I'm throwing the ball 48 miles an hour gets to be a bit depressing when I remember that I used to be able to throw the ball twice as hard without really even going all out. It's a bleak reminder of how far I still have left to go before I'm back where I was before the surgery. But as is the case when you start looking too far into the future, it's important to come back to where you are now because that's all we can ever really control. So right now, I'm faced with the problem: how can I make this monotonous task in front of me more manageable? Well, for one, I started trying to have more fun away from the field. I started going down to the practice course at the golf course near our hotel and hit some little pitches with just my left hand just to see if I could, and to work on my putting, the most important part of golf that I never practice because it isn't as much fun as bombing drives. But I can't swing a golf club with both hands for several more months, so this is all I can do for right now. Also, a few of the guys I'm rehabbing with and I started going off-handed bowling, and after a few weeks of it, I actually may have become a better bowler lefty than I ever was right-handed. Then, really switching it up, I went home. About 2 weeks after I started throwing again, I drove home to New York with a pit stop in Nashville to see an old teammate. Those of you familiar with the roads in the eastern United States will know that the route I took was not the most efficient way of getting home, but it was without a doubt worth it, and I would do it again. Anyway, being home presents me with a whole lot more options to break up the monotony, which is good, but it also presents me with yet another problem. From where I live to RPM Baseball, the facility I work out at, is just a little under 9.5 miles in a straight line. However, there is obviously no straight line route there, and the most direct way to get there usually has a ton of traffic because it's New York City. On the best days, it takes me about 40 minutes to get there for a drive that is only about 16.5 miles. My normal answer to this problem would be to simply not drive because it's New York City and public transit would normally be the better option, but in this case, it actually isn't. See, the subway system is more or less built to take people from the outer boroughs, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, into Manhattan and back out so that they could work in Manhattan without living there, and it's very good for that purpose. What it is not good for is if you have to go from one of the outer boroughs to another, such as going from Brooklyn to Queens, like I have to in order to get to RPM. Via public transit, I would have to take, at the very minimum, 2 subway lines and a bus to get there, and it would take me just under an hour and a half if every transfer went perfectly. So that simply isn't a realistic option for me, so driving it is. But rather than my normal off-season throwing, which is usually 5 or 6 days a week, my current stage of rehab throwing only requires 3. So if I lift on the days that I throw, I only have to make that drive 3 times a week, which is a big improvement. However, I also have to go to physical therapy twice a week, which slots in between the throwing days. Fortunately, my PT place is much closer to me than RPM, and I could actually take the subway there if I wanted to, as it would only take me about 35 minutes with no transfers involved. However, I could also in theory bike there, since it's only about 7.5 miles each way, and that bike ride would take about the same amount of time as the subway would. The only issue there being, I don't own a bike. But fortunately, one of my parents' neighbors had an extra one that he gave to me, which is great because it alleviates my stress about having my bike stolen, which is nearly inevitable. So now, instead of having 5 straight days of sitting in my car in traffic, I can take a nice break by taking a bike ride to physical therapy, which is good because I hate doing cardio just for the sake of it normally, but I don't really mind biking, especially when I'm using it as an actual mode of transportation from point A to point B. Even though sometimes it feels like I'm riding into the wind both ways, especially since a lot of my ride is right on the water. And sometimes you see cool stuff like a big container ship going under the Verrazano Bridge, and that's really nice. And I have a great view of the world's largest landfill, also known as Staten Island. Fun fact, the name actually comes from the Dutch word for garbage, which is Staten. So the name literally means garbage island, and there's absolutely no need for you to look up if that's true or not because I definitely didn't make it up. But anyway, this helps alleviate a lot of my boring commuting related issues, but certainly not the ones related to throwing. However, being home does allow me the full range of my hobbies and other interests, which definitely helps break up the rhythm of drive to RPM, throw, lift, drive home, bike to PT, bike home, rinse, and repeat. Since life off the field is so crucial in the life of an athlete, in my opinion anyway, I think I may start to highlight some of this stuff more now that I've rebranded this channel just a little bit. It's very easy for baseball or any sport that you play to consume your entire life and identity, and one of the biggest things that I've learned in my time playing baseball is the importance of exploring and enjoying the other parts of what make you who you are. However, even with all of my hobbies and distractions available to me, it doesn't change the fact that my actual throwing program at this point is pretty boring. It's just kind of hard to get excited about throwing a ball at speeds where your grandmother might pass it on the highway. So the answer here is a little bit tougher because I do have to adhere to my throwing program, and there's really nothing I can do about that. But on the other hand, while I can't mess around with my rehab throwing, I can definitely mess around with other things like throwing left-handed, which is a skill I picked up in college and really refined when I had shoulder surgery in 2018. I've developed a shockingly respectable lefty arsenal, and I'm convinced that if I threw against a pretty free-swinging and moderately drunk men's league team, I could probably get some outs. This may have some kind of coordination benefit or something that I'm not really smart enough to fully comprehend, but also it's just a lot of fun, so I'm gonna keep doing it just for the hell of it, and see how hard I can throw and how good of an arsenal I can develop lefty so that maybe I could be a switch pitcher in a men's league someday. It'll also be fun to see how long it takes for my right arm velo to catch up with my left arm velo, and I'm guessing it has about another month. Along with my ambidextrous ambitions, just modifying my lifts to personalize them a little bit is another way to make my workouts and arm care a little more interesting and engaging for me. Maybe instead of a banded bicep curl, I'll mix in some bicep isos near end range and see if that improves how my arm feels the next day after throwing. Maybe I have to do a lot of low weight, high volume sets with my upper body to rebuild the muscle that atrophied around my elbow. Best case scenario, I find something that helps me, and worst case, maybe my arm feels slightly worse the next day or when I have to throw again, which probably won't make much of a difference since I'm throwing 57 miles an hour. Since my throwing is at such a low intensity relative to what I'm used to, currently I have a great opportunity to try things out that I normally wouldn't risk if I had to feel good to throw at a high intensity. And all of these things put together really does finally start to put it into perspective that even though I can't change the throwing that I have to do, which is boring and even a bit saddening at times, I can make everything else I do as interesting as possible so that it's easier to deal with. But there are a few ways that I can try to spice up my actual throwing if I really want to. I try to make little games out of it with myself sometimes while staying within the parameters that I have to. Maybe I'll see how many times I can throw the ball the exact same speed, or I'll alternate which side of the 9 pocket I'm aiming at, arm side, glove side, and see how long I can keep that pattern up without missing. But really, it's just work that needs to be done a certain way, so it's more about being able to have everything else be interesting and fluid so that I can settle in and focus on the stuff that really matters. So that's that. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you want to follow with the rest of my journey through this rehab.